quick review. Yes, Timmy.
Anything you do, you're supposed to work as hard as you can.
And what are some examples of this in your world?
Sports,
Sports, school. School's hard, and it is. I totally can relate. I know what you're talking about. It's hard. The idea would be that here, school, as challenging as it may be, okay, is to work as hard as you can. Like, to do the best of your ability. Why? Why? Not your question. Why should we do the best that why should you do the best you can possibly do in school or as an athlete? There's a couple different reasons you could say here. What's one? Yeah, because God commanded you in the first place. That should hold some water. These verses here, if you're not a Christian, it's not going to matter. I mean, if you're not a Christian, it's not really going to matter to you. You're not going to be working for the Lord. You might still work hard because you want the money, because you want the college degree, because you want the grade, because you want the girl, because you want the money, whatever it is. You'll have motivation to do it, but it won't be the Lord, right? People, non-Christians, there's some really hard workers that are not Christians. They're doing it because maybe they lived in a family that instilled that in them. Maybe they have motivation to do it. What I'm saying to you here is, if you're a Christian, there's extra incentive. There's a whole nother level to this whole idea of working hard. It starts with the Lord, your God, has commanded you to do it. And as a Christian, you will naturally want to do what God wants you to do. This is just it's a fact of life. The more you love God, the more you will want to obey Him. The less you love God, what? The less you'll want to obey Him. That's how it works. It's kind of putting us all on blast, but that's the reality of it. The more you love God, the more you're going to want to do it. Like, you'll want to do it. That doesn't mean you're not going to struggle. It doesn't mean you're not going to have hard times. You will. Like, you're human, right? This doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. You're going to have bad days. You maybe have bad weeks. The idea is, though, generally speaking, your genuine love for God will be a motivating factor to do the best you can do in whatever you're doing. On top of that, God, your God, has commanded you, and because you love Him, you'll naturally want to do it. Maybe not every single day of every single second of every day of your life, but the idea is, generally speaking, you'll want to increasingly do it because you love Him. Okay? The less you love God, the less you're going to care about His commands. That's just how it works. So if I asked you, do you love God? All I got to do is observe how well you're obeying the commandments. Again, no one's going to do that perfectly. I'm just saying there's a direct correlation between the more you love Him, the more you do it. The less you love Him, the less you do it. That's just how it works. But on top of the fact that He's commanding you to do it, what else? Why else would you do what you want to do? Why else would you want to work as hard as you can in whatever you do? School, sports, your relationship with your parents, your best friend, your boyfriend, girlfriend, your job. Why else would you want to naturally do the best you can do in anything, right? Not your question. The answer's in here. There's something else besides the fact that you love Him, besides the fact that He's commanding it. That's true. That's real. I'm acknowledging that. That's legit. You would want to do the best of your ability, and whatever you do because you love Him, because you want to obey Him, because you love Him. What else is here? Ava?
God will reward you with an inheritance.
That's correct. That is it. And I think we talked about this yesterday. Forget about God for a second. And in the everyday world, what does an inheritance from a human being look like, generally speaking? What does it involve, usually? And in response to the death, what's left behind for you?
Money.
Usually some kind of money, or what else? Jewelry, property, a house. Why am I saying? I'm saying this because, in just strictly speaking, humanly speaking, if humans give good, valuable, inherently treasured inheritances, you can only imagine what Jesus is going to give. Okay? The idea would be that in the human world, in the real life world, in the world that we live, if not all families do this, but if you live in a family, if there's an inheritance to receive, the inheritance you get usually has legit value for a couple different reasons. One, it's the person who died. You hold them in such high regard. It's like a reminder. You remember them by holding on to that thing, or having that inheritance reminds you of that person that you love so much. That makes it valuable. What also makes it valuable is usually it has like legit worth. Like usually it's some kind of property, or it's a sum of money, or it's a valued possession, right? What I'm saying is, on a human level, an inheritance usually has legit worth, legit value. And my point is, if humans give good inheritances, you can only imagine what God's inheritance would look like. Because God only gives legitimately good things. He only makes legitimately good things. We said this yesterday. You can look at this in a number of different ways. Creation itself, Genesis 1:1, he made something, it was good, or very good. Made something, it was very good. Made something, it was very good. He creates wine out of water. The response is, this is the best wine I've ever had. The miracle of feeding the 5,000, the people are eating as much as they want, and it's like the best food they've ever tasted. The point is, there's a theme there. You can take other examples as well. There's a theme. The theme is, God only makes really good stuff. The best stuff. Best quality stuff. So on top of the fact that you love God as a Christian, and that you naturally want to do what he wants you to do, which is work as hard as you can, there's a whole other side to it as well. He wants to reward you. So if you actually do this, God's paying attention. That's the idea. He's not unaware. He's aware of what you're doing. And if you choose to work as hard as you can, he's paying attention. He wants to reward you. I can't spell that out for you. I can't tell you exactly what that looks like in heaven. But the point would be that if God's giving it, it's going to have inherent worth. It's going to be legitimately valuable. You won't be getting to heaven and regretting it. Oh man, I really shouldn't have worked that hard. This is lame. Whatever God's giving you, whatever God gave me, it's not bad, it's not great. No. You'll be utterly amazed at whatever he gives you. You'll be thoroughly content with it. You'll be super happy with it, right? You won't think that was not worth it. That's not the case with God. God, you can't outgive God. God always outgives you. That's just a principle in the Bible. So on top of the fact that he's commanding you to do it, on top of the fact that you love him and you want to do it because you love him, he's also saying, I want to richly reward you. Just like maybe your family has an inheritance in mind with you for you once they pass on. As an example, my wife's best friend, I think I said this yesterday, my wife's best friend, her father passed away just a couple years ago. Her father left behind property in Miramar Lakes, which is a high-end community. The label outside front says the number one community in the United States. It's safe. It's a lot of perks to it. It's a lot of money to live there. The father left that behind for her, right? That's an inheritance. I'm just saying that's a really nice place. She now gets to inherit it from her father. That's a good thing. And if a human being is willing to do that, how much more is God willing to do that? Okay? Who knows what it's going to look like in heaven, but it's going to be legitimately great. Okay? That should also be a motivating factor. So your schoolwork, challenging, hard, maybe overwhelming at times. But the point would be that you are working for Jesus Christ in your schoolwork. That's probably the number one answer here. Whatever you do for you right now, for most, if not all of you, it's the number one thing on your plate is your schoolwork. Maybe you hate the subject. Maybe you love the subject. Maybe you're indifferent to the subject. The idea to be, regardless, you keep in the back of your head, or the front of your head, your mind, I'm working for Jesus Christ. So let that motivate you, okay? I also shared an example of something that happened in my own life something that happened in my own life when I was your age with Michael Jordan. The idea was they're showing you that the second he showed up when we were playing basketball, all of a sudden we started playing to the best of our ability because he's watching. The point there is, if we didn't see him as valuable, if we didn't care about his opinion, if we didn't hold him in such high regard, it wouldn't have changed anything. Just a random Joe walking in the gym, it wouldn't have changed anything. We would have kept being just blah. Not playing hard, not trying hard, being sloppy. But because we saw such value in him, because we wanted him to approve of us, right? Because we saw him as so awesome, so great, that motivated us, and it's the same principle here. Because you see the Lord as such an awesome, you know what he's done for you, you know what he continues to do for you, because you genuinely love him so much, you hold him in such high regard, you naturally want to do the best you can do. Not easy, it's not smooth sailing, it's difficult, it's challenging, but it doesn't change the fact that you want to do the best you can do for Jesus, knowing how awesome he is, knowing how valuable he is, knowing how much he's done for you. Okay. What is the one idea that's repeated here? Last point I'm going to make. There's a couple of words that are repeated, but what is the one idea, phrase, that's repeated more than once in these two verses here? There are multiple words that are repeated. I'm looking for a phrase or an idea. What's the idea that's repeated? Okay, it's related to work.
Like working for
Yeah,
serving.
yeah. The idea is, it's not exactly word for word, but it's the same idea. It is the Lord you're serving. You're working for the Lord. That's on repeat. He didn't have to say this right here. He already said it. He's saying it again because he's trying to emphasize the point. The point is, you're working for Jesus Christ. He's your boss in a sense. The best possible boss. But the idea is, you are working for him. Let that be a motivating factor as you're an athlete. Let that be a motivating factor in your schoolwork. Let that be a motivating factor as a son or a daughter or a best friend or boyfriend or at your job. In a very real way, God is watching you, and he's willing and wanting to reward your actions if you choose to obey. That's the main gist. So quiz on Thursday, not tomorrow, but Thursday, these two verses here. Is there someone who would want to lead a class devotion and skip the member verses for the week? Come up and lead a story, teach us something about the Bible, share a devotional, share a testimony, something that God's put in your heart, maybe, anything like that. Come out and leave a devotional, and then you, instead of memorizing the verses, you lead a devotional instead. Any volunteers on that? All right. So Thursday is the quiz for everybody then. Thursday's the quiz. We are going to transition. I need to make one last point in this chapter before I move on to a new chapter. So if your textbook's page 72, textbook's page 72. I have a couple of websites I'm going to show you. Okay, this conversation may be new to some of you. Maybe it's not new to you, but I think for some of you, maybe it's the first time you encounter this, possibly. Page 72. We're in a larger conversation. This is the last point I'm going to make in a larger conversation about, is the Bible trustworthy? Is the Bible reliable? And if you take this stance, one of the points I've been making this whole time is, if you take the stance that the Bible is trustworthy and true, expect resistance to that idea at some point in your life. Maybe not now at a Christian school, but at some point, maybe you are, maybe you do have a non-believer in your family member, or a family member that's not a believer, or a friend that's not a believer. The idea would be that just expect, don't be surprised if and when someone comes across your path and thinks that because you believe the Bible is trustworthy and true, that you're ridiculous. I've experienced this myself. Maybe you already have experienced this, maybe you haven't. I'm just letting you know ahead of time, trying to get ahead of the curve. If it does happen, don't be shocked. That someone, when you say the Bible is trustworthy, the Bible is reliable, I do believe it completely, they're going to be like, are you serious? Like, how could you possibly believe in that book of fairy tales? It's 2,000 years old. And what this whole conversation is about is trying to give you some responses to common objections that people have. So one of the objections that skeptics have when it comes to the Bible is, you can't trust it because it's been changed over time. We've already talked about this. I'm not going to go back and talk about it again. You can't trust the Bible because it's been corrupted. The Bible we have today is not the same message that they had, thousands of years ago. We talked about that already. The first one was, you can't trust the Bible because the Bible was written by human beings. Okay, these are real, actual, from experience. People actually say these things, not just a textbook idea. People actually believe you can't trust the Bible because human beings wrote it. You can't trust the Bible because it's been changed over time. The third one is, you can't trust the Bible because it's not complete, meaning there are other books out there that the Bible has left out. And on the surface of it, that's a fact. Like, there are books written around the same time as the Bible that were left out of the Bible. So in a sense, that's true, because it's a fact. There are books, if you're not aware of this, there were other works, there are other things being written at the time of the Bible. The Bible wasn't the only thing being written in the ancient world, if you haven't caught that yet. So there are other people writing other things at the same time as the Bible. So why aren't there other books of the Bible then? Because some people are going to say, well, you can't trust the Bible because there are certain books that should be in the Bible that aren't in the Bible, therefore you can't trust any of the Bible. If that makes sense to you. You can't trust the Bible because there's certain books left out. Let's talk about this, because this is an important topic. And I'm going to give you some examples of this in a second. Let's just start the conversation by reading the paragraphs under objection number 3. This is page 72. And the first thing mentioned is what they call the lost gospels. Let's read about this in a second. Can I get a volunteer to read the first two paragraphs under objection number 3 on page 72? That is in 1945, and why are these lost gospels? So, two paragraphs. Volunteer. Sam, thank you.
In 1945-52, alcohol were discovered at Nag Hammadi in Lower Egypt. Some of these texts have the word gospel in the title. Scholars have known about these and other 2nd through 4th century documents for a long time. But in a culture that loves conspiracy, the worries and cover-ups these so-called lost gospels make an irresistible story for investigative reports on television. Why are these lost gospels excluded from the biblical canon? Generally speaking, there were 3 criteria used to decide which books were received as authoritative in the script.
Okay, thank you. We're going to read these here in a second. The list of 3, there are 3 of the main criteria that went into making the decision of, should this be in the Bible or should we leave it out of the Bible? If you're not aware of this, there was a process by which the Bible was formed. There were actually meetings, at least 1 or 2, that a number of church leaders essentially got together and decided which books went into the Bible, which books were left out of the Bible. This is what we're going to talk about today. Okay? Some skeptics would come along and say, well, wait a second. The Bible can't be trusted because some of these books left out should be in there. Therefore, the whole thing can't really be, you can't have confidence in it. They're missing books. Okay? One example of the missing books are called the lost gospels. I'm going to show you one if we have time. The Gospel of Thomas is one of the lost gospels. Okay? The reason that some people say it's, again, the skeptics will come along and say, it has the word gospel in it. So why isn't, we have the Gospel of Mark, we have the Gospel of Matthew, we have the Gospel of John, we have the Gospel of Luke. Why do we have the Gospel of Thomas? Why is that missing? Okay? There are reasons why. Okay? First off, the date. Did you catch the date of the lost gospels? When were the lost gospels kind of formed? It's in the paragraph that Sam just read. These gospels were formed when? What period of time? Can you find it? Second century through 4th century. And when did Jesus die and resurrect? In what year-ish? Historically speaking, again, this isn't history books. He was killed in what year? 33. So what's the problem if you have the year 33 and then you have a bunch of gospels that just appear? And 2nd century is the year 101 to 200. and then you have, it goes up to the 4th century. So these lost gospels are appearing, they're being formed in the year 101 to 4th century be 399. The year 101 to the year 399. What's the issue with that? For sure, secondhand at best. What does secondhand mean? Secondhand what?
They're not getting the information directly from them, but they're getting the information from someone who knows from them.
Right. They're not first-hand accounts. This is all. This is the first point that we're going to make here. When it came to making decisions about what books went in the Bible, the very first thing is what is called apostolicity. Let's read this on page 72. What is apostolicity, Cam?
There's the bathroom.
Is it emergency?
Yeah.
Jesse, are you awake, bro?
Yeah.
A volunteer to read apostolicity. This is the first thing that the Christian leaders who formed the Bible, essentially, they formed the Bible using these 3 main ideas. The first idea is apostolicity. What is apostolicity? Let's read it. Volunteer, read number 1. Ava, thank you.
Apostolicity was a book written by an apostle or an associate of an apostle. Mark was accepted because he was an associate of Peter, and Luke was accepted because of his relationship to Paul. Or, to put it another way, if the book was not from the 1st century, it was not scripture because it could not be historically connected to the apostles who were taught and commissioned by Jesus.
Thank you very much. The idea there, to summarize it, is a couple things. One is, if this makes sense to Owen's point, it's not second, or to Eliza's point as well. The point is that these aren't second, third, fourth-hand accounts. These are first-hand accounts. Meaning, the books that we have in the New Testament, and really the Old Testament too, but specifically the New Testament, they're accounts by people who either saw Jesus with their own eyes or knew someone personally who saw Jesus with their own eyes. So, like, for example, Luke, I don't know if you knew this, Luke is not one of the apostles. Luke knew Paul. Luke was really close with Paul, and a lot of people think Mark as well. So he was like best friends with Paul and Mark, and therefore is considered trustworthy because Mark and Paul had direct contact with Jesus. So this is first-hand accounts. Right? These aren't second, third, fifth, 10th-hand accounts. These are people who had direct contact with Jesus or knew someone personally who had direct contact with Jesus. When they were forming the Bible, the first thing they asked was, is this book written by someone who knew Jesus or knew someone who knew Jesus? If the answer was no, then they threw it out, right? Related to that is, if the book they're considering for the Bible if it wasn't dated to the 1st century, then they also just didn't consider it because too much time has passed. That's the idea. What's the idea? We've already talked about this. Why is it important to have books written as close to AD 33 as possible? Which all the New Testament books are dated between AD 33 and usually the 80s in most cases. AD 80 and AD 80. AD 80 or 88 or 85 or 65. What is the problem if you have Jesus dying in AD 33 and then the first stories you have of him are 150 or 250 or 350? The year 250, the year 230, what's the problem with that?
The stories could change.
Yeah, man. Stories can change, people can make stuff up, people can add stuff, people can leave stuff out. The story then would not be considered to be legit because too much time has passed and people can manipulate it, is the idea. But what we have in the Bible is first-hand accounts or first-generation accounts of what happened to Jesus, okay? So apostolicity, was it written by an apostle or someone who knew an apostle? The first and main criteria used to form the Bible was that. Was this book written by an apostle or someone who knew the apostle? Or knew Jesus? Right? For the second time, I'm going to read the next two. Number 2 says, orthodoxy. Did this book, the book that they were considering for the Bible, was the book that they were considering for the Bible, did it conform to teachings and theology of other books known by the apostles. The idea would be that if God really is real, if he really is true, you're not going to have God contradict himself. So if God really is a standard of truth, you're not going to have him say one thing in one book and then another book say the exact opposite. That's a big problem, right? But you don't have that in the Bible. So when they were considering which books go in, which books go out, one of the, besides was it written by an apostle or someone who knew an apostle, it was that this book of teachings, did it coincide or did it relate to or did it fall in line with the rest of what we know is true, right? And you're going to find really quickly, I'm going to give you some examples of some books left out of the Bible that contradict the Bible pretty severely. I'm going to show you this in a second. Okay. Number 3 was pedigree. Was the book accepted early on in the life of the church and by the majority of churches across the region? Okay. It was important that a book wasn't just accepted in one location, but that many Christians and many different cities and many different regions accepted it. The idea would be that you have a number of people in a number of different locations all acknowledging that this is true. Now, in the back of your mind, you might think, well, maybe they're all in on it, right? It says here that, from number 3, was the book that they were considering from the Bible, the Gospel of Thomas, for example, and we'll get to the Apocrypha here in a second, was the Gospel of Thomas a book that was widely considered to be scripture by many, many, many different churches? Why would that be an important standard there? It's not just one church in a random country city. There's one church believes this is true, the rest don't. No, it's all of them acknowledge that this is true. Why is that important? Guesses? Let me just ask this then. How do we know this isn't one big grand conspiracy theory? Because this is what some people still think. Some people, not all, but some people think something along the lines of, well, if they were just accepting books that said the same thing, and they all just happened to agree that it was true when it really wasn't true, you just have one big grand conspiracy theory. What's the problem with that idea? We've talked about this in other context. What's the problem with the early Christians or early believers in that generation all agreeing that the Bible is true and legit when it actually isn't? If it's just a grand conspiracy theory, that means it's all made up. If it's all made up, why does that idea not really make sense? A grand ancient conspiracy theory. They all said the Bible is true, so it's all conveniently true when it really isn't. Why does it not make sense for them all to... Why does the conspiracy theory idea doesn't really hold much... Why does it not hold much water? Can anyone think of an idea? What's in it for them? Think about this for a second. If this is all a big joke, if the Bible was formed and they all just pretended it was real when it actually wasn't real, why does that not make much sense? Because they had no motivation to hold to a lie like that? Because the lie, the conspiracy theory, was resulting in their jail sentence and their torture and their rejection and being laughed at. They're not getting rich off this message. They're not getting promoted because they're believing in the Bible. They're not getting women or men because they believe in the Bible. They're not getting fame off this. Guys, there's no motivation to do it. You can still believe whatever you want to believe. The people who think this is a big grand conspiracy theory, it doesn't even make sense logically. Okay? But some people still believe it. What I want to show you, and we're not done yet. I'm going to use the last 3 minutes. What I want to show you is give you some specific examples of ancient writings that the Christian Protestant Bible does not have, but other religious bodies do have. Like, here's one example of this. And if the Apocrypha is something that you find in the Catholic Bible. Okay, if you're Catholic, I'm not insulting you. I'm not making fun of you. Honestly, this is just a reality of it. If you look at a Catholic Bible and you look at a Protestant Bible, they are different. There are books in the Catholic Bible that aren't in the Protestant Evangelical Bible. All I got to do is go find a Catholic Bible, look in the middle of it. I believe it's right in the middle. Right? It's called the Apocrypha. Okay? The Apocrypha is a set of ancient writings that the Protestants don't see as authoritative. Why don't we have it in our Bible? Here's one really quick example. If you were to study the Apocrypha, you find these two realities. Okay, these are two different books in the Apocrypha. Specific books, specific verses. If you were to look at this, one of the things there's multiple things listed here, but one of the things that's listed in the Apocrypha that we as Protestants don't believe in is this right here. As water extinguishes a blazing fire, so does almsgiving atones for sin. What in the world is that saying? What is that saying? Second verse, for almsgiving delivers from death and keeps you from going into the darkness, capital D, as hell. What is it saying here? What is the Apocrypha teaching? Yeah, Ava?
That you need to give money to save yourself from hell.
Yeah, that giving money, almsgiving, actually saves you, makes you right with God. Atone here is the idea that you're right with God. If almsgiving makes you right with God, then why in the world is Jesus dying on the cross? That's the most ridiculous thing ever then. Why would he suffer so much? Why would he go on the cross if almsgiving atones for your sin? This is a fundamental difference. Okay, we'll talk more about that in the coming.